If you're beginning your journey on creating content and posting it on social media, running a podcast, YouTube channel, email list, whatever it is that's organic, your first question might be, how much should I create and post? Well, today I'm going to answer that question for you. There's a couple of kind of like mechanisms that I want you to be thinking about in order to determine and establish how much you should actually be putting out. Because the reality is you'll hear people on Instagram, influencers that are content creators and that sort of thing say like, publish like 100 pieces of content a day and that sort of thing. In a perfect world, yes, absolutely, that's what we want to do. However, we run businesses. We run full-time businesses. We're not full-time content creators. So we have to balance our time between creating content and actually running a business. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of questions that you're going to want to ask yourself in order to be able to establish this, then kind of give you some light framework on how to actually go about actually determining how much you should be putting out and then how to get that rolling. So again, I'll address, it's not realistic to be thinking that you can create one podcast a day, 7 days a week, or daily YouTube videos that are going to be 5 to 10 minutes long and 5 posts on social media every single day, especially if that's where you're starting from. Now, the flip side of things is in the world of marketing, let's assume you're running a business and I'm talking to you right now, but in the world of marketing, there's one of two ways that you pay for marketing. It's either with your money or it's with your time. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. But creating content, unless you have like an editor that you're working with and a team that's actually posting content for you, but if you're bootstrapping it and starting from scratch and it's just you, you're spending time on that. And that's precious time that you could be building your business. Now, arguably, you could be creating content to help market, to help build your business. But at the end of the day, like, yes, maybe putting out one social media post could go viral and blow you up. But realistically, it takes time and consistency to create any sort of well-established brand on an organic platform. So we have to be thinking in lines of hope for the best, but prepare for not the worst, but prepare for realistic. So hoping for the best is like, yeah, we would love for our content to go viral immediately and for it to reach hundreds of thousands of people across all platforms. But realistically, that normally doesn't happen. It's kind of like winning the lottery in a nutshell. And you can do proper things to set yourself up for proper success. However, that's just not realistic. And that's what we're chasing after right now. Now, I notice some people, they may be thinking like, yeah, but realistic is like, that's not reaching, that's not being ambitious. Cool. But when we're dealing with marketing, we're dealing with your time, we're dealing with creating content, we have to make sure we're fitting in the proper wheelhouse. So the first question that I kind of run people through is, what's your capacity like? Now, I know people that run a business and, especially early on, and when I was starting my business, I was working 80 to 90 hours a week and had almost no time to create content and actually run marketing for my business. A lot of it was just sales stuff. So I would get referrals, I would call that person, work that lead and that sort of thing. So while I was doing some marketing, it was very unrealistic for me to be sitting down and creating 5 hours a week of content because I was so wrapped up in building the business, doing the actions and basically operating and running my business. So I had to find time for that. And I think realistically, once I got started, I realistically could allocate 1 to 2 hours a week on content creation. So I had to figure out and make it work. I had to figure out like, okay, if I'm only spending 2 hours a week on creating content, what is going to be the best bang for my buck? What's going to actually move the needle in order to be able to move forward and start to get leads and start to market my business, build brand and establish. And what I landed on was running a podcast. So I ran a podcast and still do to this day, the REI Marketing Weekly. And on that podcast, I actually interview people that could be potential clients of mine. So I was not only creating content by getting, guests on my show and running a podcast, but I was also almost trapping those people on a sales call with me and introducing myself. A lot of the people that I never had, actual relationships with. We were friends on Facebook or whatever, or maybe they were a friend of a friend. That was my strategy. So I was trying to knock out 2 birds with one stone while creating content, also running kind of a sales mechanism in my business. So maybe getting a little creative with it is kind of the trick there, but you really need to establish what will work for you. Can you allocate 5 hours a week to content creation? Can you allocate 30 minutes a week to allocate for content creation? Or what I do with some people is I actually have them batch content on a monthly basis. So once a month, they dedicate 4 hours a month to be able to just batch all their content at once and get it over with. So for example, like right now, I have a good 2 hours to create content, and I'm creating these videos specifically for the next month's worth of content that I'm sitting down to do this. And that's kind of how I planned it out. So just a little bit of preparation, prep work is going to actually be able to get you an established foundation to maintain a consistency of creating content. The other thing you really need to be thinking about, which I talk about a lot, is making sure you understand and know your target demographic better than they know themselves. This is marketing 101. If you've never walked through and done an exercise to establish your avatar and, establish who your target demographic is, then either go with the Story Brand Guide, which is by Donald Miller, or the One-Page Marketing book. It's a book, and then they have a plan that goes with it. Either one of those will work, but walk through those if you haven't already. A little side note. After you've established that, you really need to understand what your consumer consumes, right? Who does your customer follow? How much content do they consume? In a real world of professionalism, if you're marketing to business owners, if you're marketing to corporate professionals or active doctors or dentists, people that are very busy schedules, they're probably not sitting down on TikTok watching 1,000 videos at night. They're probably reading a book, or they're listening to a podcast, or maybe they're watching YouTube videos. So you really need to understand what type of content they consume. Now, again, depending on the volume of content, so like a podcast, generally speaking, you're not going to be putting out a lot of podcasts on a weekly basis. The average is about 1 to 2 podcast episodes a week. People that are doing really well will do 3 to 4 a week. That's kind of breaking a point where, podcasts can go from like 30 to 60 minutes long. So that's a lot more allocation to content. However, the awesome thing about that is the long form content can now be chopped into short form. So you're not actually creating more content for social media. You're just having an editor chop out those small clips that you can republish and repost for the social media algorithm. And if you get even more creative, if you have a 60-minute podcast, you could even take 5 minutes of that podcast and reproduce that, repackage it as its own YouTube content, put it out, transcribe it. Then you can repackage that as an email blast. You can get super creative with it. And I think that's the thing that I'm going to get at here, is that utilizing your time, creativity, but also making sure that you're being highly efficient with your content is the trick here. So instead of you recording a 1 hour a week podcast, then separate 10-minute YouTube videos, 4 videos a week, then separate social media videos, and you're doing like 20 of those a week, just start from there, right? Do one long form piece of content that can be chopped into YouTube content, and then that can be chopped into social media content. Now, as you grow, as you do more, maybe your business is growing and you're able to delegate a little bit more, you have a little bit more free time on your hands for marketing, then absolutely yes, ramp up the number and the volume in which you're creating. That's the ascension ladder you want to go at. The problem that I see with this principally is that people will start with hiring an in-house videographer. They've never put out a piece of content in their entire life. They'll hire a full-time in-house videographer, full-time editor, they'll have the cameraman walk around with them everywhere they go. They'll create an insane amount of content, stay hyped on it. They put it out for, a couple weeks, and then 2 months from then, you don't hear from them ever again. And then you look at them and like, hey, what happened? Like, you used to post a lot. Where's all the postings at? And they'll say, well, it kind of burned my time out, and I just couldn't allocate the time. And I'm like, well, why don't you just go back to doing 1 hour a week of recordings and then posting a little bit? And it leaves a bad taste in somebody's mouth when you start here, whereas you should start from step 1 and then work your way up to the longer time frames that you're recording and that sort of thing. So that's the thing that I want to make sure everybody understands, is taking it in stride. Now, if you say, I know several people that have started a podcast, they ran social media before, they took a break, pause, then they came back, but they understood what it took and they start at a higher level. That you can do. But I think a lot of people try to start at the highest level, don't understand what it actually takes to create the consistency and the good flow and rhythm of content. And so they give up a couple weeks in, and then they chalk it up and say content doesn't work, social media doesn't work, podcasts don't work, YouTube doesn't work. But they actually didn't take the proper procedures and steps to establish a good foundation for creating content. So hopefully that helps somebody today. I think that there's some foundational stuff that you really need to be thinking about. A lot of it is just based around your capacity and your time. If you're going to be the one that's on the videos, make sure you understand what capacity can I actually allocate to creating content, because the last thing in the world you want to do is dedicate 10 hours, but you only have 2 hours a month, and then you get into this and you start to, stop recording content. You can't keep up with it, and then you stop doing it altogether, and then you say it doesn't work. That's where we want to avoid. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to leave a comment down below. You can also follow me on social media. Just look for Josh Culler. I am verified. That'll also be linked down in the description below. And send me a direct message if you're interested, and I would love to talk to you and answer any more questions that you have about this topic or any other content marketing stuff at all. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, and make sure you subscribe. Check you out later. See ya.